Welcome everyone to our ongoing classes on the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 universal Noachite commandments and topics related to that. By way of introduction to today's class, we will be studying a letter written by the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And it is published, it is printed in volume 1 of the Igrot Kodesh series of letters, the original letters. The series is in chronological order of years of many of the letters that we have, that the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson has written, correspondence to various different people of all walks of life, very learned people in leadership positions, great rabbis, great Jewish leaders, sages, wise men, political leaders, average people, so to say, very simple people, boys, girls, older people, younger people, children, middle-aged people, you name it. And he addresses different issues. For the most part, these are responses to letters that were sent to him. Now, one introduction. The Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson spoke about himself, but as always, the style in which he speaks about himself, if you're not used to it, seems to be a bit ambiguous. He basically speaks about his father-in-law and predecessor in present tense, in present terms. Calls him the Rebbe, which means, of course, leader, grand rabbi, head of our generation. Although his father-in-law passed away in January of 1950, throughout the years, even in the 90s, the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson refers to his father-in-law as my father-in-law, the leader of our generation. And when he speaks about things about himself, so the language, the way he says it, is almost always about his father-in-law. Then it's a certain style that we, as his followers, as his disciples, pick up and understand. So anyone who delves into the written word, the edited word, as well as the unedited word, and anyone who makes a study, which people have done this, they're actually people who have done their doctrine on studying the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe Shlita, or particular subjects that he addresses, and what is his philosophy and what does he himself say. Probably most famous is all about Mashiach, the messianism in Lubavitch. What does he, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, say? At any rate, you will understand quite clearly that when he says, my father-in-law, the leader of our generation, it is almost always a reference, at least, to himself as well. Unless, of course, he's saying a story that happened, that took place with his father-in-law, something like that. And then obviously he's talking about his father-in-law as an individual person. But otherwise, he views himself as simply an extension of his father-in-law. And that's why, at times, when he makes the distinction that we are the next generation, in his words, we are the 7th generation of the dynasty of Chabad, then that is a very unique statement that he makes. But he made it in his very first official, if you want, inaugural gathering, where he finally, after a year, of refusing to accept the leadership, in January of 1951, in his inaugural gathering, and the discourse that he said there, and then later edited for publication, he makes it very clear that we are the 7th generation. His father-in-law was the 6th. The Alter Rebbe, Rebbe Schneer Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, the founder of Chabad, Lubavitch, is the 1st. His son is the 2nd, and so on goes the line, father to son usually, sometimes father-in-law to son-in-law, as in our case, from the 6th to the 7th. So the 7th Rebbe is a new generation. And in that gathering, he made it very clear, and he's mentioned that several times. Again, in 1986, at the end of December of 1986, and then again in 1992. So from time to time he makes it quite clear, but we all know that when he speaks of his father-in-law, he means himself. Now, this whole long introduction I'm giving you is by way of preface to a particular talk, an essay, that he delivered in the summer of 1991. It was Shabbos afternoon. The Torah portion then was Parshas Shoftim. The date was the 7th of the last calendar month, Elul, the 7th of Elul, just a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah. And during that talk, which he edited in Yiddish, he elaborates and explains in great detail and length the idea of the prophecy that in the times of Mashiach, the Jewish people will receive once again their shoftim, their judges, and their yoyatzim, their advisors or counselors. And he makes it very clear that besides in general having judges and having advisors, there is the one and only, the primary judge of the generation, and the one and only and the primary advisor of the generation. And that is, and here's the reason I gave the whole introduction, I'm going to say, and that is himself, for the sake of accuracy, and also people shouldn't think, oh, really? So he spoke about himself like that? Well, no, indirectly. He says, that is my father-in-law, the leader of our generation. He is our current judge and advisor. And he is the leader of the generation. And then, a very large portion of that essay, of that talk, is prophecy. And he explains how prophecy will return prior to the actual coming of Mashiach. And he says, we're holding at that point, prophecy has already been restored several generations ago. And he says that all of the Lubavitch Rebbes, respectively, were prophets. And then he speaks again about his father-in-law. And he says he is the, capital T, the prophet of our generation. And he says many prophecies, and they have been fulfilled, of course, which proves that he is a true prophet. And then he says that the legal ruling is, the way it's in the Rambam and Maimonides, is that if someone who's known and proven, according to the Torah, to be a true prophet, testifies that someone else is a prophet, then that person is not to be tested at all, but we're immediately to accept that that disciple is a prophet before he even proves himself at all. He needs to do nothing because he has been pointed to by the one who we know as a prophet. And he says, as is the case in our generation. So very clearly, hinting and implying to himself vis-a-vis his father-in-law. And he says very clearly that we have various prophecies that he has told us, and then we come to the main prophecy, and that is l'alter legeula, to immediate redemption, and immediately hine zeh Moshiach ba, that behold, this one, Moshiach, comes. Now in that talk, as far as what are we supposed to do, practically speaking, what lesson does he have for us? Because in many of the farbrengens, as we call them in Yiddish, of the Hasidic gatherings, he demands that after the gathering, we have to walk away not only with more knowledge and with great insight into Torah, but actually have to take upon ourselves positive resolutions in our behavior and to take on new things, whether they're projects or individual things, whatever it may be, but we have to take upon ourselves new things. So he says in this particular talk, what is the lesson, or as he puts it, the deed that we're supposed to walk away with? That is to publicize to all the people of the generation. So from his wording there, many of us understand that to mean not only to all Jews, as often is the case when the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson starts a new campaign or wants to publicize a certain concept or a certain idea. So he says to publicize it and to get every Jew on board, to have every Jew do this, whether it's all Jewish men to don tefillin, or all Jewish women and girls to light the Shabbos candles, whatever it may be. But he speaks very strongly about having all the Jews. Here, different than most of the other talks, he says to publicize to all of the people of the generation. That seems to quite clearly imply non-Jews as well. And what are we to publicize and to bring to the attention of all the people of the generation? And that is that God Almighty has chosen an individual who has freedom of choice. That means he is a living Jew. He's got freedom of choice. Who personally is incomparably greater and beyond all the people of the generation. There's no one who's second to him. He's not first place because then they're second and third. No one can compare to him. That individual should be, he appointed him, to be the judge of the generation and the advisor of the generation and the prophet of the generation. And he therefore issues various different rulings and he gives advice. He counsels people on all matters. And then he specifies whether it's in the observance of the precepts to actually do the technical mitzvahs, the commandments, as well as one's personal deeds, which are not technically mitzvahs. They're not commandments. They're regular things. Eating, drinking, business, going about life. We're there too. He instructs us and he guides us. He gives us advice. Now again, based on this very long talk, there are, generally speaking, two approaches, and he has both. So to say, he's wearing both hats. One is the judge, which means, I don't want to use the word dictates, but he's speaking from above downward. He tells, he commands, he instructs. This is the way it is. If you understand it, good. If not, that's fine. Still got to do it. If you appreciate it, good. If not, still got to do it. If you choose to do it, great. If you choose not to, you have freedom of choice, and it's up to you. But that is the wrong choice to make, because the judge has, figuratively speaking, banged the gavel on the table, and that's it. Final, that is the verdict. That's one type of instructions that he gives. The other type, being the advisor, is that he explains it in such a way, and he's only telling it for your own good, and he wants you to appreciate that. So therefore, he's speaking not down at you, but instead of saying that he's speaking at you, in the sense of to you, but from above, he's speaking with you, meaning to you, but as almost as an equal, or as someone who came down onto your turf, on your grounds, so you can appreciate. And he explains it to you, and it's only a suggestion. He's making a suggestion. And in that regard, if you choose not to listen, all right. What happens when you have a counselor, and the counselor advises you to do A, B, and C, and you choose not to listen? Well, then you come back to the counselor and you say, I got a problem. Well, if you would have listened, well, we'd be holding it a better place. But you chose not to listen. Okay, so let's work with what you have now. And here, in this situation, what I suggest is D, E, F. And if you choose again not to listen, and you come back to him, well, okay, here's what we're dealing with. And I'm going to try to explain to you, so you should appreciate where I'm coming from. And I am talking to you for your benefit. And we appreciate it. So it's not like a king or a dictator. It's like a friend who is simply advising, and I really, really know that he's doing it just for my benefit and for my good. And there's nothing else that concerns him. That's the advisor. His instructions fall into both categories. And that's besides the fact that he also speaks as a prophet and a Torah sage, which that too, each one of those fall into one of those categories, but I don't want to get too carried away with that particular talk. Now, the reason I'm saying this is, according to that, non-Jews, B'nai Noach, just as well as Jews, should be turning to the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson for advice, for guidance, for directives. Now, from the time that he said this talk until things seem to have changed in our communication with him was exactly half a year. Exactly half a year later, what appeared from our eyes, to put it in our terms, talking about a righteous person, talking about a Rebbe, but to use our terminology, or the terminology of the medical world, of the doctors, he suffered a stroke, a very severe, debilitating stroke. And he was basically paralyzed on the right side. He stopped speaking, even though he was able to speak, and that the doctors can attest to. And he spoke very, very few choice words at times. So then our communication changed. So basically for the next 2 years after that, instead of writing a letter and mailing it or handing it into his office, the secretary who then would give it to him, and he himself attests to in a number of letters that he personally opens up all of his mail. So confidentiality is complete. And even when the secretary types up the letter, they don't know what you wrote, they just know his answer, and then he signs it. And sometimes the answer would be just on a written note, and they would read it to you or show it to you. During this period of 2 years, basically, if anyone had any issue or anything that they wanted to ask, you would call up the office, and one of the secretaries, you would tell him your issue, and he would go into the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was office and read to him the mail of that day, and with a nod of a head would receive the answers. And if it was more than yes or no, so then they would ask several questions, and based on that, the Rebbe Menachem Mendel would nod yes or no, and they would continue to question until they had a clear answer. And that is how people led their lives for those 2 years, basically. All major issues that none of his followers would dare do without his consent and blessing, that's how they continued to do it. Whether it was health issues, whether it was financial issues, whether it was important decisions in life, such as getting married, to decide that, yes, this person, I will marry them, if two people wanted to get married to each other, or whether it was serious health issues, like should we make the operation or not, which doctor should we listen to, things like that. And actually, at that period of time, also one of the miracles that happened was with one of the hurricanes in South Florida at the time. This wasn't the first time, but in this period of time as well, he very clearly indicated not to evacuate. And the secretary asked several times to make sure that the secretary is not misunderstanding. So I should tell them in the Rebbe's name that they should stay. Yes, they shouldn't leave. Correct. Stay. Yes. Okay. And sure enough, at the last moment, it veered course, and the place actually where they were going to, where the authorities said to clear out to, that's really where it was hit. But otherwise, the area that was supposed to get hit was spared. So there are countless stories of that period of time. And then, after that, going back till from about 1994, where that type of communication also now changed, and for the most part, we don't physically see the Rebbe Menachem Mendel, although we know that he is still alive physically, but that's a whole discussion for itself. So now, how do we communicate with him? So the most common way of receiving answers from him, of getting his opinion as a judge or as an advisor or both, and therefore following his decision and getting his blessing, is through this series of books, his books, Igrot Kodesh. And allow me to explain. In the mid-1980s, around 1983, he instructed his chief librarian to compile the letters of his predecessor, the sixth Rebbe, and to put out a series called Igrot Kodesh, which means sacred or holy letters. Igros are letters, Kodesh, holy. And the first volume came out, the second volume, in chronological order. And as that was coming out, then he said to start working on the fifth Rebbe. Anyhow, over the years, basically throughout the 80s, volumes came out of all the Rebbes, from the first through the sixth. And then, by pretty much complete surprise, in 1986, I believe, he instructed that his letters, his own letters, should be published in the same manner. Now, this was a tremendous surprise because, as I said, his common way of discussing and describing himself vis-a-vis his father-in-law is that his father-in-law is the leader of our generation. So for him to instruct that his letters should be just like all the other ones, all his predecessors, Igrot Kodesh, sacred letters, talking about himself, Me'es from Kvod Kedushas Admor Shlita, from our holy Rebbe, may he live and be well. So that was really, really a pleasant surprise, to say the least, for all of the followers, for all of the disciples, for the Hasidim. And then volume after volume began to come out. So volume 1 came out 1986. Sorry, 87. I was off by a year. My mistake. It first came out in 1987. This was volume 1. And basically, it's the earliest letter that we have over here goes back to 1927. And it's through 1944-ish. Then comes volume 2 and 3 and 4. And he was really encouraging the librarian and pushing him to work very quickly. And every letter, before it was published, there was a whole system, but basically had to be approved by the Rebbe Menachem Mendel himself. If it was very private, then it was not allowed to be published and to be included. Otherwise, the names of the people were taken out, or the name of the place was omitted, but the letter itself would be there. And this is for the benefit of people being able to study his letters. Then there was a period of time, right around the same time, interestingly, that instead of seeing people privately, which he used to do in the early years, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and then somewhat in the 80s a little bit, but really mostly for the first 3 decades, people would be able to make an appointment and have a private audience, anybody who wanted to. You just had to call up and say your name and ask for an appointment, and usually 6-7 months in advance, it would tell you, okay, the main secretary would open up his little book and his calendar over there, and he told you what day, what time, and he would say your appointment is 2:30 a.m. in 7 months from now. It was usually Sunday nights and Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. And it was pretty much only at night. And it would last throughout the night, sometimes into the morning of the next day, until everybody got their turn. And you came in, and there are countless stories of people that had this experience of what's called in the Hasidic lexicon, yichidus, which means a private audience. And sometimes they would last 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Sometimes they could last for hours with one individual. There are countless stories and miracle stories and how people's lives were transformed and changed, and he gave them guidance on what to do. All right, well, then that changed. And then, right around the same time that the Igrot Kodesh series began to come out, there were every Sunday, all of a sudden, he started a new conduct, a new custom of his. That upstairs, in the hallway, in the foyer, not even in his office, in between the synagogue room and his office, right in the hallway, right in front of the elevator, every Sunday, he would distribute crisp single dollars to tzedakah, for charity, for each individual to come and become his emissary, his agent, to give it to the charity of their choice. You came by, he would hand you a dollar bill, and now he has empowered you to give this to charity, to whatever cause you feel appropriate. Generally, he would say 2 words in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew. Bracha v'hatzlacha. Blessing and success. You now received, spiritually and physically, his blessing and success. That could set you for life. $1, 1 time, 1 second, 2 words, you're set for life. However, many people took this opportunity, and he seemed to invite them to do so, to be able to speak. And as long as it didn't take up too much time, because there was a long line of thousands of people, you had the opportunity to ask whatever you wanted, and pretty much in any language you wanted. And he would respond. Very brief and quick, but you saw, and what so many people say over from this experience, so many people you could speak to who actually experienced this, at that moment, when your eyes locked with his big blue eyes, piercing eyes, when he looked into your eyes, you felt that there's nothing else in the world, not just for you, that all there is you and him. Nothing else in the world exists for him except for you. And those few seconds that you're with him, which felt like an eternity, I'm telling you, it felt like an eternity. And so, not just focused, but so zooming in all the way into the depth of your soul. And whatever he would tell you, this is like, that's it. So now you knew. And this is before he said this talk about the judge and the advisor. But you have this feeling, this is the word of God. And whoever came took his advice and saw success in all areas of life, materially, spiritually, emotionally, you name it. People either saw open miracles, or people like he once said to someone, the biggest miracle will be if I can influence you to do the right thing. That's the miracle. And that went on for a number of years. So we now have opportunity, instead of just writing a letter to him or having a private audience, you didn't even have to make an appointment. And I know people that came from overseas, special, just to meet him on Sunday, and flew right back. There was a businessman in London, and at the time, I don't know if you recall, but there were what do they call those planes? I think they stopped and they were too costly.
Concorde?
The Concorde, right, thank you. And he would take a Concorde after Shabbos was out in London, arrive in New York, go to 770 Eastern Parkway, the Rebbe Menachem Sheikh's address, mention whatever business he had, which was really big deals, get the blessing, go right back. And he did this whenever he had to do it. So this went on, and you got to your opportunity. Okay? I'm giving you this very long introduction because I want you to have an appreciation of what I'm going to say now. So here we are today, where, as far as we're concerned, from our perspective, unfortunately, for the most part, most of us can't really hear or see him live, only from videos, audio, and visual things. And of course we have his writings, his Torah, that he put himself into it. Now, the Talmud makes a statement about God Almighty. And the first word of the Ten Commandments, which is not even originally a word in Hebrew. Interesting. The first word God says to the Jewish people when he introduces himself at the revelation of Sinai, the first word literally is not even a word in the Holy Tongue. It's an Egyptian word. Anoichi, which means I. That word, which is comprised of 4 Hebrew letters, the Talmud says is hinting to 4 words in Aramaic, which is Ana, I, Nafshi, my very self, my essence, Ksavis, have written, Yehavis, given to you. Meaning, God placed his essence, his soul, as it were, into the Torah. And now, the Jewish people that have his Torah, that's how we have his essence. He's ungraspable. He's beyond understanding. He's beyond any description. He's beyond everything. But he put himself into his Torah. Says the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, being that our sages tell us that the righteous are similar to their Creator, it's the same thing with the tzaddikim, the holy righteous Jews, who have written their teachings, their interpretations and explanations on the Torah. It's not just their novel thoughts of Torah. They actually placed their essence into their Torah teachings. So now, if you take a volume, a book of Torah, which was written by a truly righteous sage, and you open it up and you study any section there, any chapter, any page, you're actually connecting on the deepest level with that righteous person. So, for example, the Tanya, which was written by, as we said, the Alter Rebbe, Rebbe Schneerson, the first Rebbe, over 200 years ago. So now, when someone takes the Tanya and opens it up and studies it, they are connecting on the deepest level to the essence, soul of the Alter Rebbe, of the author of the Tanya. So too with any tzaddik. Now, with his foresight, the Rebbe Menachem Mendel instructed to publish his letters, Igrot Kodesh. And they're published in this series as they were originally written. Mostly Hebrew, many, many letters in Yiddish as well. It's actually almost close to 50-50, whatever it is. I've never really done this as a study, but I would guess it's about 60-40 or so. About 60% Hebrew, 40% Yiddish, depending on who he's writing it to. Now, there happens to be that letter number 1, in volume number 1, the very first letter is a very, very deep letter in profound Torah thought, and it's written almost cryptic because of the person he wrote it to was such an outstanding genius. Letter number 16 in this volume, which is printed in the original language that it was written, and that is French. And then there's a free translation that he didn't edit into Hebrew. So this letter's in French. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, just to give you a sample, so they actually show you a facsimile of the handwriting of the original letter that the Rebbe Menachem Mendel had written in French. Otherwise, most of the letters are Hebrew and Yiddish. He wrote many, many letters in English as well. So then, years later, a series of the letters in English were published. And then you have these letters in English. This is volume 5 that I just randomly pulled off the shelf. These are letters that the original were written in English. And again, many letters, they took out the name of who it's written to for the sake of privacy. Otherwise, they left the name in there. Now, what became common practice when a person wants to get the advice, to get the instructions, the directives of the Rebbe Menachem Mendel, based on sources, you take randomly a volume of these letters, and then you concentrate, you connect in your mind, in your soul, yourself with him. Some people actually formulate a letter, just as you would have written 50, 60 years ago. No different. You write a letter addressed to him, and you sign at the end your name, and if you're Jewish, then your mother's name, and if you're not Jewish, your name and your father's name. That's the traditional way to do it for a blessing. And then you randomly, so to say, open it up and place your letter there. Some people, they don't necessarily write a letter, they do it in thought. Just as they would be coming into a private audience, even though then, for the most part, you did hand him a letter. Or as you came by for dollars on Sunday, where most people just asked for what they wanted. Some people handed a letter, most people would speak. So, be that as it may, either way, you open it up, and there you have it. And that is his prophetic message to you. These are letters that he wrote years ago, and then had them published decades later. And now, he's finding this as a medium to answer your predicament. So you're coming along in the year 2020, right? So now we can have vision, 2020, clear vision. You come in the year 2020, and you pull out a volume of letters that he wrote in, let's say, the 1950s, and were published for the first time in the late 1980s. You open it up, boom, there's your answer. It's amazing, amazing. Sometimes it's so clear that you're blown away. And there's leaves no room for doubt. And you say, what? What's the date on this letter? Who's it written to? Are you sure this letter was not written to me today? Things like that. Countless examples. Now, there's the English volumes as well. Now, after this very long introduction, my point is that it's not only the Jews that are supposed to turn to him in such a fashion. I believe, based on that talk that I mentioned at the beginning, of Shoiftim, Tavshin Nun Aleph, 1991, to publicize to all the people of the generation. So, for the next half a year, you can write him a letter, you can come for dollars. But now, if you want to hear his response, the volumes of letters. And you can even do it online. And then, so to say, the computer randomly gives you the answer. Which again, we believe, it's just like when you open up the book, this is the way that the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson is answering you. And you would go to Igrot.com. What's the spelling of Igrot? I think it's Igrot. Igrot.com, I think. And you submit your request, your question, and then immediately he answers you. Now, these letters start from even before he was Rebbe. His father-in-law, as we said, passed away in 1950. He officially accepted the leadership in 1951. The first volume only takes you to 1944.